Welcome into the DMV zone on this year today, an anniversary. 67 lives lost after a Black Hawk Army helicopter collided mid-air with an American Airlines passenger jet just as it approached Reagan National Airport. Today we're looking back at the victims, what's changed, and the future of flying. Welcome into the special edition of the DMV zone. I'm Marina Morocco, and this week the National Transportation Safety Board has emphasized that the collision was entirely preventable as officials failed to heed longstanding warnings. 1 year later, families still demanding answers.
I think early on our group of family members came together and realized that this crash should never have happened. This was a series of mistakes, a series of systems that had lined up that didn't keep our family members safe, and we don't want that for anyone else's family members.
I wake up every morning without my son, so it hasn't changed.
Yeah, for me, I just wonder, you know, will ever be happy again? And we got to keep this in front of the media and the public to make sure that things are changed. We can't let them go and die in vain.
We asked for the public to support as much as they can, calling their local senators, their congresspeople, to ask for them to support any legislation that improves aviation safety.
We've got Katie Barlow with us tonight, speaking with many of those victims. And over the next hour, we're going to speak with aviation experts and attorneys and those who covered the complexity of this crash and the investigation over the past 365 days. But of course, we begin with the story of those victims, mothers, fathers, pilots, lawyers, hunting coaches, ice skaters, all traveling from Wichita, Kansas into the Washington Reagan National Airport on that night of January 29th, 2025. Dozens of lives gone in an instant. Fox 5's Katie Barlow had the opportunity to sit down with 9 of those family members right here earlier this week at Fox 5, and their story is still just an unbelievable. The fact that they've got the strength to come on to talk about it and to really memorialize those lives lost.
You know, the strength is a good point. We just heard a little bit of that conversation talking about the work that they are doing, the advocacy that they are doing, and that was part of the theme of the conversation, because anytime any family experiences a death or a tragedy, there's always work left for the living, and sometimes that's a blessing. It's hectic sometimes to plan a funeral, but that's the work of the living, to plan a funeral, to mourn the passing of that person or people. There's always work left for the living. That is especially true for this group of people who have now taken it on themselves to advocate for safer skies. And so a big part of that conversation was about the work of the living and how they are doing in their progress. I mean, we heard this week NTSB Chairwoman Jennifer Homendy say that this was entirely preventable. Now, I want to say we talked a lot during the course of this special that's going to air tonight. One that especially stood out to me, Marina, and I think probably will you too, we're new moms. I still count us as new moms. And parenting was a theme of the conversation. There was an especially remarkable moment, I think, a standout moment in the conversation, talking to Audrey Patel, who lost her beloved Vikesh. She calls him Vic. And the way they were newlyweds just before the crash, and the way she describes her love for him is so vivid in that conversation. I'll never forget it. She says, "I love this man so much, he made me spit out my toothpaste every night laughing," right? I mean, that just gives you a perfect picture of what the dynamic was. But she learned that she was pregnant, 6 weeks pregnant at the time of the crash. And so she dealt with the burdens of pregnancy, which are not easy, and the burdens of postpartum in the middle of this tragedy that was happening. And she came on and told a little bit about that. But then we got a moment to learn a little bit about her new son.
He is incredibly sweet and calm. I think the universe knew I needed a break. He's been very easy.
Good job, universe.
He's got dark brown eyes and a dimple on his cheek like his dad. And it's just been incredible having the family support that I have. My parents and sisters have been on rotation living with me to help me care for him.
That was also a theme of the conversation. She talked about her family coming for those middle of the night feedings, right?
I mean, you talk about
with that.
strength, and he had just learned that they were going to be parents, and I think that was so powerful. I think another moment that really struck me in that conversation with you, Katie, is how she decided how to name their son, and it was something that didn't happen until the delivery room, which he obviously was not there for, but how that went about.
Right. She said that he would never want to name their child anything that his sister didn't approve, and so she was texting with his sister while in labor, which is, again, a different kind of strength, as we talked about on that special. And they came up with the name ultimately. And the whole family has come together in helping her in those early days, which are impossible. But you kind of saw that with a lot of the families, how they've come together and grieved, but they're also coming together to do the work, whether it's advocacy, raising a child. And, you know, some of the people who lost their lives that day were parents already. We talked with the Stovall's. We talked with Ashley and Lovey Stovall. They lost their beloved Mikey. Ashley was married to Mikey. They have a son, Jake, and Mikey was Jake's baseball coach. He knew nothing about baseball. He learned baseball in order to become his coach. And Ashley had this moment where she talks about actually getting kind of jealous of the time they were spending together leading up to the crash. Take a listen.
In the last year of his life, Mikey and Jake were spending so much time together. Baseball, hunting, golfing, snowboarding. God, I was just thinking about this the other day. There was like more BMX riding. They would just load up the bikes in the truck and go to the jumps. And I was like, man, I'm getting kind of jealous here, you know? So
they needed that time.
They did. And that's the thing. After somebody told me recently that at his service, someone had said, you know, it's almost like Mikey knew, because who spends that much time with his kid, and who tells his wife that he loves her that much because he did, and who never says no to any trip. It's like he knew he had to live so much because it wasn't going to last long.
That was Ashley, who was married to Mikey. You can see in that she's wearing a picture of him, which before we started the conversation, she was talking about how hot her husband was, which was just a moment, you know, that resonates with people. Everybody happily married can relate to that.
It's tough, because I think nobody believes these stories until you're in those shoes, and to try and understand is something that we do as humans, but we'll never carry that weight. And it is these moments of levity and the memories that keep them alive, and to keep telling those stories, and really the purpose that she shares there, Mikey spending so much time with their son, as if that fateful day was in his soul from the very beginning. It gives you chills just to hear that story. But you see people finding meaning in those moments, and meaning in those days and months leading up to this. And that's human nature too, I think, and the ability to find meaning shows also the resiliency of human nature. And it's sometimes incredibly frustrating, depressing, challenging to have to be resilient. And I'm sorry that they have to be resilient, but that kind of demonstrates the type of resiliency that they have worked on in the last conversations. You had 9 of these family members sharing their stories, and some people last second deciding they wanted to come on and do the special, because it was so important to the very point to share their stories publicly, because in sharing these stories, it keeps their memory alive. Yeah, Ashley and I actually had a moment in the conversation, because I kind of ended the conversation saying it's an old attribution to Ernest Hemingway, right? That we die twice in this lifetime, once when we're buried in the ground, and once the last time somebody ever utters our name. And as soon as I said that, Ashley said, I almost said that to you. But part of that work that we are doing, and that conversation does, is continuing to say their names and tell their stories, which gives the living some comfort and helps us learn more about what happened, and gives life to their lives that they led before this happened. I just want to, another moment from the conversation, and this kind of harkens back to the theme of parenting. Maybe that was one of the broader ones, because there were so many parents who were lost and parents who lost their loved ones. I asked Matt, who lost his brother Chris, what it was like, because there are no days off in parenting. You don't get a grief day, right? You can get a grief day off of work, but you don't get that in parenting. And I asked what it was like to continue to parent while you are grieving, but also you're modeling grief for your child, and you're watching your child grieve. And that's just a doubly complicated thing to have to do. And this is what he had to say.
Yeah, it's been a journey that I hope nobody ever has to do. It's been tough. It's been it's been rewarding working with a lot of the other family members and trying to prevent something like this from ever happening again. And I think my kids seeing me do that brings them some proudness and some joy, as to honor that's honoring their uncle, and that's his legacy.
I think in the end, this sums it up very well. Matt's testimony. It's making sure it never happens again, because they understand, unfortunately, this grief so deeply that to put that burden on somebody else, and knowing that they can encourage the prevention of it, and that's really the stage that we're at a year after, is making sure this never happens again.
The work of the living continues.
Yes, it does.
For
Katie,
better or
thank
worse.
you so much for bringing us those conversations, for continuing to keep those voices out there. And of course, you can watch the full special tonight on Fox 5. 1 year later, the deadly DCA Collision. That's at 7 p.m. on Fox 5. We'll hear from those grieving families in their totality. That conversation there with Katie Barlow. And for the first time, we're also going to hear from the first responders who risked their lives on the recovery mission just moments after the crash. You can watch that full long-hour special tonight at 7 p.m. on Fox 5. And you can also watch it on the Fox Local app. Stay with us here. When we come back, we're marking this 1 year, checking in with aviation experts, with attorneys that know far too well how these crashes go down in trial, in juries, before juries, and in the courtroom. We'll talk to them on the other side of this break. The DMV zone, of course, we're marking this 1 year anniversary here since the collision over the Potomac, and the NTSB has been dealing with hearings lately to finally have a conclusion and recommend safety changes here following this crash. I'm joined here by aviation expert and WTOP reporter Dan Ronan with us here, and as well as attorney and managing partner for Simeone and Miller, Tom Simeone. Thank you both for joining us here. Dan, we'll start with you. We've talked about it this week because the hearings went on for so long. Yesterday was the vigil. The families have been here. The recommendations, listening to the chairperson there for the NTSB, Jennifer Homendy, the frustration in her voice, demanding that these recommendations be heeded, because they have in the past made recommendations, like she said, for 50 years that still to these days have their limitations and are not really being heeded by the FAA. What's your take overall from how the conclusion of this investigation, where it's headed now?
The investigators did a great job. The board did a really thorough job in a very compressed period of time. Normally, an investigation like this takes 18 months. Obviously, they wanted to get this out before the anniversary date to help the families a little bit. So they really compressed the timetable. And from everything I've read of the report and the documents and watching the hearing the other night, they did a great job. But you made a great point. These are recommendations. The NTSB cannot write laws. They cannot write rules for agencies. It's going to be up to the FAA. It's going to be up to Congress to really dig into this and to make these recommendations, codify them, and turn them into law.
And make them law. Tom, just to be clear, you are not representing any of the victims here in this case, but you are a personal injury attorney, and you understand what this looks like legally speaking. We talk about these recommendations. Obviously, the families, I imagine, are going to be looking for some sort of remuneration to some degree for negligence, for whatever other cause. But also, is there a part in play legally where they can demand that some of these recommendations be part of the settlement, that they be enforced? Can they demand that as family members, legally speaking?
They could demand it. They're not going to get it. Civil litigation generally is limited to compensating the victims for what they went through. Could a party, the United States in this instance, agree to do certain things? Probably. They're going to make the changes. Will they do it pursuant to this lawsuit? No. But these lawsuits do create this change. This is part of the process. The lawsuit, the investigation, the press, the families have been very active. All this is finally getting some changes that are long overdue.
That is the part that's crucial here, right, is making the changes. And to some degree, we saw the accountability from the military coming out early on in the investigation, post-crash. I don't want to call it culpability of sorts, but they did put out a letter to some degree sensing as though they may have been and culpable, if you want to call it that. But the FAA seemed to be where the MTSB was really lying more of the blame, or at least pointing fingers to change to make sure this never happens here. What does this look like legally? Who are the families looking for recourse from? Is it from the military? Is it from the FAA? What about the airline here? Does American Airlines also bear some of the blame?
Yeah, the plaintiffs in this case did what plaintiffs' lawyers should do. You bring claims against all potentially responsible people. So there's claims against the government. Now, the lawsuit is actually against the United States of America, but it's for the Army and the FAA. So both of those are covered by the USA. And that's where the focus is for the government. And the government has come in and on behalf of the Army and the FAA, admitted responsibility. They've also got claims against American, who basically is the company that took the reservations and everyone booked through, and PSA ran American Eagle, ran the actual plane. They have moved to dismiss the case, and just from an outsider's point of view, the stronger case is clearly with the government, or against the government, and that's why they've accepted responsibility. So I think the airlines are going to continue to fight this, but I think the plaintiffs are going to be okay because, again, the government has come to the table.
All right, well, we talk about it, it's almost two overlying things, right? Because the NTSB, to your point, they don't create law, simply recommendations here. What of anything that you hear do you think, other than that Route 4, which seems to be so critical, that Black Hawk was riding up and down the Potomac bank on that COG mission, a training mission the night of the crash on the 29th of January of last year, that route was suspended almost immediately following this crash. There's been talk already about the possibility of opening and reopening that route, and this has been one of the first points from the NTSB to not do. If the top recommendation is already about to be broken, there's a possibility here that none of the recommendations ever go through. What are the checks and balances here to make sure that these recommendations follow through? Public pressure from Congress, public pressure from the NTSB. Chair Hamady, a couple of months ago in the summertime, when it came out that that route was going to be reopened possibly, there was a defense bill floating around Congress, and language got back in the bill. And Hamady took this very unprecedented step, holding a news conference and saying, no, we're not going to do this. We can't do this. We can't have this route open. There was only 75 feet of separation between helicopters and fixed-wing aircraft. That's crazy. Let's show that video. This is a simulation, if we have it, a control room from the NTSB hearing from this week, where they showed the simulation here of the American Airlines aircraft and the Black Hawk, and just how close they were and how little, if any, time they had to redirect and to correct it. We're showing a map here. Hopefully we can get that simulation video here, because Dan, I'd like you to walk us through this video. I think it's important. You're a pilot, you're an aviation expert, you understand these things. That's the monitor there. I think, are we going to get this video here? Okay, we're working on getting the video. You see the Potomac here, where they crashed. How many feet above that runway were they before touchdown for that American Airlines jet? 300 feet, maybe. They were close to minimums, what's called an ILS approach, an instrument landing system approach. They were almost at minimum. That's a decision where the pilot, if it was instrument conditions, clouds, bad weather, where you have to make a decision, do we continue or do we go missed approach? So here's this video. They were almost at minimum. Let's show this in full. You're going to explain what we're watching, because to an untrained eye, what exactly is this? Well, we're seeing the convergence. We're seeing from the aspect of what it looks like at the pilot's eye as they are approaching the runway. They have made the turn to runway 33, and they are coming in towards 33, and you see the convergence on the other side of the helicopter coming from what would appear to be your right-hand side. It says now about 1,000 meters away as they converge, and the American plane is very close to being home. I mean, they're over the runway, they're over the river, and they are making their way along the route. They've made the turn, and they will be 15, 20 seconds, they will be landing on 33. And then that never happens. And then it never happens, and the video just stops. But is the pilot, I mean, you are almost at minimums. If you are on an ILS approach, you are almost at minimums, and you are 10, 15 seconds, maybe 20 seconds away from landing. Unbelievable that we have to be at this point now where still these recommendations are a question mark. Will they be in effect? I know we're going to have much more of this conversation. Tom, Dan, thank you. We'll see you on the other side of the break, because when we come back, we'll talk about military action, what the military has changed, if anything, and what will change in the coming days. Stay with us. We'll be right back. And And as we continue to talk about the anniversary of that deadly DCA crash, some airspace rules have changed, but is it enough, and will they stay in place? We've got Strategic Director for Concerned Veterans for America and a veteran of the United States Marine Corps and Army National Guard, John Burns, to talk about this. We talk about that Route 4, John. We were talking earlier with the attorney and with the aviation expert, the possibility that that would reopen, which the NTSB said would be absolutely detrimental to any plane landing or taking off from Reagan National. Obviously, the airspace near and around D.C., heavy military, carries VIPs, including the president here. What changes can be made, and is it sustainable to keep that route shut down?
Yeah, just, before that, I want to just, express total condolences to the families and all the affected. I left D.C. Reagan about 2 hours before that. I landed and got home to see it on the news. A lot could be changed. I mean, there's a failure of government. I heard your last set of guests. The FAA clearly dropped the ball. A lot went wrong there. I've flown in on that route and watched helicopters pass beneath the plane. It's scary. It's an important mission, though, for the Army. It's an important mission for the Department of Defense. That Route 4 is designed, and they run that route as training in order to evacuate the president, the vice president, secretary of defense, and other VIPs during a national emergency. So the mission has to get done. But there are lots and lots of measures that the Army itself could take, installing those ASDBs and making sure they're working, making sure that the pilots are trained in night vision use around the city before they're running that route. I think that might have been a contributing factor. There was a report in the NTSB, there was mention of the fact that the altimeters in the helicopters are not necessarily calibrated correctly, and that the Army has never published that. Knowing what I know about Army aviation, and I'm not a pilot, but I've flown in a lot of Black Hawks, there has to be some word of mouth that that's a problem. But the training on that route could also be done at a different time, right? You think about Reagan Airport, it's a lot busier right around 6, 7 o'clock than it is at 1 o'clock in the morning. So they can get the same night training later on. There's just so much that could be done better, even on the Army's part.
Yeah, I mean, it was the perfect confluence of all sorts of issues that just aligned here. Flaws, like the chairperson said, and also failures from the FAA, to your point, but including that ADSB, that automatic dependent surveillance broadcast tracking system, that was off the night of the crash. And unknown if that could have changed things, but it likely would have alerted.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing that struck me is pilots who are coming into D.C. Reagan should know this training mission is on. There's no reason, unless it's a real-world mission, that should not be part of kind of the mission brief of the Army helicopter. Hey, you need to let everyone know that there's a shared channel, that pilots coming in are made aware, very early on, that there is a helicopter mission going, helicopter rehearsal. There are just so many more things that the FAA, not only the FAA, and they came under a lot of fire from the NTSB, but the Army could step up, and I'm sure they are. But to that point, Army lessons learned, they knew that the altimeters were a problem, and yet somehow that didn't officially get to the pilot community.
Yeah, just an unfortunate confluence of events there, a tragedy, and so many close calls that we know and have learned from the NTSB in years prior to this crash. John, we always appreciate your perspective, and thank you for telling us a little bit of how you shared that day. Just an unfortunate moment for so many in this region, including, of course, for those families. Stay with us. Back after this.
I've learned along the way from other disaster victim families that we have to use our voices to ensure that, as Bill said, that the legacy of our loved ones is kept alive through change, and that this means something. This results in something better.
At the time of the crash, his older sister, Denisha, was 3 months pregnant, and I was 6 weeks pregnant. So we had just found out that we were expecting our first child, and so this year has been incredibly hard to go through welcoming our son without him to see it.
the stories that will forever live on there of those victims. One person who was on Fox 5 the night of is aviation expert Richard Levy. Richard, you were on our air just minutes after the crash, and we were trying to sort through what exactly had happened. You walked us through what you thought in the moments and the hours after the fact, and obviously we've learned so much more to the very details as to what looks like likely caused this crash. How do you look back at what the chairperson for the NTSB has said, the recommendations, and your assessment? Has it changed a year after?
Hi, Marina, and to your viewers. The night it happened, my conclusions, my thoughts of the limited information I had that night to 1 year later has changed a little bit, but not that much. Some of it is so common sense. If you have helicopters coming down the Potomac River and aircraft are landing at departing runway 33, make the helicopters hover. That's what a helicopter can do. It takes 2 to 3 minutes. It cannot get easier than that. So that was a concern that night. Now, the NTSB, the chairperson mentioned the ADS-B as a possibility of a help, and Senator Cruz did also. I partially agree, but not totally. I flew internationally 41 years around the world. ADS-B helps us see other aircraft across the Atlantic or the Pacific Ocean and identify who they are. We're talking about something completely different. A helicopter come down the Potomac River, the Black Hawk, and the PSA regional jet flying what we call a visual approach to runway 33. Things are obviously happen very, very fast. To see use an ADS-B, if there's an Army helicopter ahead of us to the right, if I'm in the American Airlines or the PSA regional jet, would be possibly helpful. Any information is helpful, but what is of most use is, of course, TCAS, traffic alert collision avoidance system, and that gives us an alert of another aircraft and then direction how to maneuver away. So that's my thoughts. Those are my thoughts the night of the crash, and those are still my thoughts now. In fact, at the NTSB hearing, right about a month after the crash, Marina, the Army testified, as did a medevac. Medevac, for you listeners who do not know what a medevac is, it's a civilian helicopter service all around the U.S. that carries patients that maybe are dying, and they are told to hold and hover over the Potomac while you give way to landing traffic.
And a lot of what I'm hearing, and you seem to be, I mean, obviously you've flown for 4 decades, you understand the mechanics of landing, taking off a plane, and making sure that you don't collide with another one, and you're here with us, so you are testament to that. But a lot of what you're saying seems to be missing guidance here, and that was a main topic of conversation, was air traffic control. And at some point, we've gone through the radio communications, and you hear air traffic control talk about, do you see this jet, and name the jet, and it seems as though there's confirmation from the Black Hawk that they do, but the possibility that they were seeking and avoiding the wrong jet.
Absolutely. Blessings to them. That's a difficult job with the looking for that PSA jet. Yes, 2 times they said they saw the jet. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't, because what's the challenge, Marina? Behind the PSA jet are city lights of Washington, D.C., the Capitol, and buildings and street lights, etc. So it's kind of camouflage, and they're moving at about 2.5 miles a minute. That's a speed of about 130 knots, maybe 140 miles per hour. That's a difficult job. Why would you say to the helicopter, yes, maintain visual separation, instead of saying, hold your present position and wait until the PSA jet lands?
As they say, you know, everything 20/20 vision after the fact, and that's the unfortunate part of this, that we can't bring back those 67 people. Richard, always so great talking to you, especially with your expertise, and we appreciate it much here on the anniversary. Thank you, Richard.
Maria. Blessings to the families.
All right, let's go back and check in with our panel here and see Dan as well as Tom, because obviously the big question now in this year after, what happens now, legally speaking? What are the challenges going to look like here for the family as we talk about who the claims are going to go against, the U.S. government, that being the military, as well as the FAA, and then also the airliner here. So, Tom, I want to continue with you here, because what does this the next years look like legally speaking, and how long are we looking at before this wraps up, legally speaking, for the family? They can close this chapter and move on with their lives, or at least with some closure in just having to relive this every day.
Yeah, well, the litigation is pending. The government, the U.S. government, has come in and accepted responsibility. That has the potential to shorten this considerably, because otherwise we would be having a lot of litigation over who's at fault and what happened. Right now, again, the airlines are trying to get out of the case. Whether they get in or out really matters. If they're out of the case and it's just the government, federal government, it's relatively a damages-only trial. Still takes a while, but it's a lot quicker. If the private airlines stay in the case, they may litigate and may have to go through all the facts. They have to say, we are not responsible, only the government. So the answer is, like many litigation cases, this is more of a marathon than a sprint. Because of the federal government's admission, I think it's a little shorter, but we'll see.
We know that U.S. airspace is considered safe. Statistically speaking, these things don't happen. We talk about the NTSB, the recommendations, what can change to assure that this doesn't happen again. How safe is it flying in the United States of America?
It's very safe. I mean, we had gone, and people like myself who fly, we had talked about how the fact that there had not been a serious accident with major loss of life in 15 years. That is phenomenal when you consider that in the 1970s and 80s and into the 90s, there was one, maybe two major airline crashes every year. But in the last 25 years, the FAA, the airlines, have done a tremendous job of improving air safety. We don't have planes crashing once a year like we did 30, 40 years ago. So is it safe? Yes, and that's why when these things happen, it's such an anomaly and it gets so much attention. I mean, we're talking about this a year after this accident happened because it was such a rare occurrence.
We talked with, go ahead, Tom.
I was going to add something. When we say how safe is air travel in the United States, very, very safe, but it's not equal. Some areas are safer than others. And I think what this case is bringing
to that point, how safe is it to fly in and out of DCA?
Again, compared to other areas, it's not as safe. We all have known these problems for a while. They keep increasing the number of flights. You've got the military presence. And it's sad, but this case and the deaths that happen and the family's actions are finally bringing to light and hopefully get some real change. But it's safe. I fly out of there myself. I would not hesitate to. But it's clearly not as safe as other airports.
One of the busiest runways on the eastern seaboard.
It is. The long runway at DCA is the busiest runway in the country, the busiest single runway. And that's what, on the night of the accident, the night of the crash, it's because of the fact they were taking a departing plane. That 5342 was originally lined up for runway 1. It was coming directly over the Potomac River, over the Woodrow Wilson Bridge, and then it made a right-hand turn and then was diverted to the shorter runway because it could land on the shorter runway. It doesn't need 7,000 feet.
Smaller jet.
Smaller jet, precisely. So they were trying to get another plane out, get one in. And because of the separation on that with runway 1, if they had landed on 1, they would have had to have.
Was this a mistake on air traffic control?
I don't think so, no. And everyone I've talked to says no. However, if you read what the NTSB said, the air traffic controller was clearly stressed. Minutes before the crash occurred, they had 10 aircraft between military and fixed-wing airplane flying around DCA, and they backed off a little bit. They backed it off. But at the time of the crash, they were up to 12. And had they had the optimum staffing level that they needed that night, they might have caught this.
So many mistakes. Again, those words from Jennifer Homendy of the flaws and just so many issues that aligned that night to cause this, and so many close calls that were averted because the confluence didn't align. That is what sticks in my head, as all of us have flown in and out of Reagan National so many times. The possibility that something like this has always existed, and the hope here is that it doesn't exist anymore. I know we'll be coming back to both of you for some final thoughts, and before on the other side of the break, we're going to talk with first responders the night of, what it's been like a year after the crash. Stay with us.
We did not rest at all, and we worked for weeks and weeks to make sure that not only the loved ones were brought home, but we got their personal effects, and we did our job.
And responding to mass casualty events, part of the job for local first responders, but they tell us nothing could have prepared them for the night of January 29, 2025, and the weeks of recovery work that followed. Hundreds of first responders from across 36 agencies diving into those freezing waters of the Potomac River, recovering victims and their personal belongings, both a physical and emotionally grueling process. Our Home Abash spoke to some of those divers that were first on that scene that night and what they remember a year ago.
They were racing against the clock, in the dark, on the water, and now we are hearing from the first responders who pulled victims from the river on the night of the crash, and the moments they will never forget.
I just saw a fireball and then it was just gone. So I haven't seen anything since they hit the river, but it was a CRJ and a helicopter that hit.
They are the first ones in and the last ones out.
It's the worst thing that I've ever seen in my career of 22 years here in Washington, D.C.
And on the night of January 29th, 2025, they were there in minutes.
I'm an on-call diver for the department, so my phone rings and I answer the call.
First responders from D.C. Fire and EMS, D.C. Police, neighboring counties and states. 350 first responders that first night from 40 different agencies.
At what point did you know this is different than anything else I've ever dealt with in my career?
Immediately. Yeah, immediately.
Officer Robert Varga is a diver with MPD's Harbor Patrol Unit. He did 3 dives that first night, ranging from 20 to 25 minutes, pulling 6 bodies from the river.
Each dive, you were just trying to see how long you could last underwater. It wasn't that we were running out of air. It was kind of we were running out of the ability to keep moving our hands, our fingers, and all that.
Despite the frigid temperatures and darkness, Varga says some things actually worked in their favor. The majority of the crash site sat in relatively shallow water, roughly 8 to 10 feet deep.
We actually had more visibility than I've ever seen in this river in 13 years. So some things did kind of fall into place to make it a little bit easier, but there's no way to prepare for that.
We train a lot. I don't think we train for this. I don't know how you train specifically for this scenario.
For Varga, what stands out most in his mind was the eerie quietness of arriving first, and the overwhelming nature of the scene in the seconds after.
And then kind of the realization that not only you're witnessing it, you're the person that's going to be trying to help.
They understand the job. They understand they have a lot of experience. But I think the magnitude of it was hard.
But beyond recovering victims, 67 remains in 6 days, it was just as crucial to bring their belongings to the surface.
Luggage to anything we size a laptop, down to anything the size of a cell phone, down to wedding rings and jewelry and anything that we could give back to the families.
How emotional is that?
Very, yeah. Each piece we would pull out kind of felt like a treasure in itself. And we knew it was, super important for anybody who had a lost family member in that event to have anything they could back from it.
We did not rest at all, and we worked for weeks and weeks to make sure that not only the loved ones were brought home, but we got their personal effects, and we did our job.
As terrible as this incident is, it's a model response, and I'm very thankful for that. I'm thankful for our region, the commitment of our region to work together.
Hundreds of first responders came out here that night, and many of them returned in the days, the weeks, and the months to come. And the weight of this tragedy, that'll stay with so many of them forever.
Like you heard Homa say, the crash taking a toll on first responders, their mental health. In response, DC Fire and EMS, together with the Firefighters Union, setting up a peer support network, on-site crisis counselors, and a 24/7 crisis hotline. And part of the trauma for first responders who had to work through is now flight anxiety. How do you return to the skies after being on the ground, witnessing firsthand the horrific aftermath of a disaster like the one over the Potomac? That's a question that victims' families have also faced, especially considering the safest means of transportation resulted in them losing their loved ones forever. Joined by Dr. Mina Murholm, a Columbia psychiatrist, to make a sense of flight anxiety that has really gripped first responders, the families, and truly the public at large, especially here in the D.C. region. This is an airport that is used by so many, and to see this, not firsthand, but there in the minutes after, Dr. Murholm, I mean, this is something that is very hard to process.
It's incredibly difficult, Marina, and oftentimes when we talk about flight anxiety in general, that can impact up to 10 or 20% of the population. One of the things that we walk people through is that this is almost an irrational fear, that flying is relatively safe and so on. But obviously in this case, one of the things that you want to begin to acknowledge, either if you're a first responder or a family or somebody just in this area, is that there's real reason for concern, and you can put that in context and say it's understandable for me to feel fearful, concerned, worried, but then to put that into the greater narrative, greater story, or the statistics around the whole rest of the year, is that this remains a safe way to travel. But one of the key things here is that you have to convince your body of that in the moment. And sometimes your mind knows something, your body doesn't believe you, and there's a process to kind of help get your body there.
How do we do that? Because emotions, to your point, are so overpowering of your body and of what rationally will likely not happen. And yet still, how do you explain that to the family of the 67 victims?
Well, that's the thing. That's why we want to begin there, that the combination of fear and grief, as a family is grieving, and there were so many great segments that you highlighted here, that there's a way to make meaning of that grief, and there's a way to turn that into advocacy. And then there's a way that you can honor the legacy of those that were lost by continuing to sort of live your life in a powerful way. And sometimes acknowledging that emotion of fear, grief, loss, difficulty, and then using that to be able to say to your body, okay, in this moment, I'm going to close my eyes, I'm going to breathe deeply in for four seconds, hold that for 4 seconds, breathe slowly for 4 seconds. That signals to my body, we're safe, we're not under attack. There are techniques like that, but the key thing is not to ignore your emotion, not to gaslight yourself and say, of course I should feel perfectly fine, but also not to live in an avoidance. That's the big thing that I tell families, is that you don't want to live in a way that's going to avoid things that you should be doing as well.
Or fear.
That's right.
Dr. Murholm, we appreciate it. Thank you so much, because I know so much processing for so many who didn't even know the victims, but of course for those who were truly affected personally by this tragedy. Thank you. We appreciate it. Stay with us. We'll be right back. All right, before we go, final thoughts here. We'll start with you, Tom. We talked about how long this is going to take, the damage is part of this, and every individual here, although they were all on that same jet, they all have a very different case.
Yeah, and one thing to keep in mind with wrongful death cases is it is a emotional roller coaster for the families. You have to relive this. You have to relive kind of what you lost in your family member and what they went through. And every case is different. So even if this case is streamlined in the sense that the government's admitted fault, it's still got a ways to go. It's going to be painfully, processed step by step. Each element of damages you have to go through, and that's a painful thing. Again, though, one of the good things about these suits I like doing as a lawyer is not only do you get compensation for people who really need it. There's people now who don't have a father, a mother, but you also, again, help make change. A big lawsuit like this and the work the lawyers are going to do are going to help push us to hopefully a better spot.
It affects change in the sense that nobody ever wants to be held liable for this, so they have to make the recourse.
Exactly. If the federal government, not only the NTSB, who they're going to do what they did, but they can't force anybody to do it. But when the government has to write a big check or many big checks or a lot of resources and talk about this, that adds to the impetus to make change. It's bringing it attention that, again, we knew about this in the past, but unfortunately it took a crash like this to get us to the point where we all say, hopefully, there's changes.
And let's talk about that as we give you the final word here, Dan. What are we expecting here? It's a year past the investigation. The recommendations are going to be made, and then it goes to the Hill to see if these changes are codified into law.
Well, they have to be. And I think you'll see a lot of people really looking to what Hamidi has done, what others have done. And there also is a big financial penalty, as he was just saying. The bottom line out of this is that complacency kills. Doing things a certain way and thinking it worked well because it worked well yesterday, it didn't work. And the community, these families, the aviation world has suffered a terrible tragedy. Complacency kills. You can't let your guard down, especially with airspace that is so difficult, so challenging, and so complicated.
Absolutely. Dan Ronan, Tom Simeon, we appreciate both of you, your perspective here a year later following this crash.